And the last one is neoclassical realism. So neoclassical realism is about what state do depends in large part on influence located at domestic level of analysis. So the major difference between other realists and neoclassical realists is the neoclassical realists talk about a lot of domestic level of analysis. So many realists, all of them actually, thinks that international structure, international politics matters a lot. But neoclassical actually think the same way, same thing. So they think that sure, international relations matters, but uh, also we can't ignore domestic factors as well. So they look at the inside of the state. So foreign policy is a result of decision made by governments and their leaders. So not simply a reflection of international pressure. So their main argument is this. So yeah, some structural realists they think that they found out that states behave in a similar way in the face of international structure, but it's not always same. There are some states which do not follow other states' behavior. Then how can we explain these kind of states? So that's where the question come from for neoclassical realism, and they look at domestic politics. The domestic politics can be answer for these behaviors. So they look at the foreign policy of the state level, and they think that state foreign policy is a decision, final decision made by leaders in government. So it's not because of international pressure. So based on this foreign policy, uh, state behave like that way. I mean that's very natural because I mean if we compare, if we try to understand the Europe or American foreign policy, then depending on what kind of president they have, their foreign policy has been changed over time, right? So nothing hasn't really changed maybe, but because of different leaders, they come up with different foreign policy, so they act in a different way. So how can we explain the U.S. Foreign policy? It's not just, I mean, they think that the neoclassical realists do not think that international pressures is more than enough, and public opinions, regime type, interest group, perceptions, cognitive biases, capacity of state to mobilize resources for foreign policy. So they think that if the real neo-realists, they look at inside of domestic politics. Inside of domestic politics means here public opinions, regime type. Is it democracy or non-democracy, kingship or interest groups? So like, how can we explain the U.S. They do not give a gun? It's because of high interest, because of the high pressure from interest groups and perceptions. How should do, I mean, perception matters maybe, because even though let's say US did a lot of bad things to Koreans these days, right? But some Koreans think that the US matters, still matters. So we can't just betray the US because of long history between the two countries. I think it's based on the perception. So let's say Soviet Union or Russia did the same thing to Korea. I don't think Koreans just saying like that way because it's perception. Perception matters in international relations a lot. And biased capacity. So even though we do something, but if we do not have enough capacity, then we can't fight against the US, right? So capacity matters. So starting point for neoclassical realist distribution of capabilities in international system, but itself do not provide clear information. So they actually look at domestic politics first. So systemic threats and opportunities are not easily identifiable, and there are numerous policy options available to decision makers for meeting strategic goals. So they start when they understand states' behavior, they look at domestic politics And throughout this domestic politics, they look at also international pressure. So they do not regulate international pressure or international system per se, but they try to understand the state's behavior based on the domestic politics and then international relations. So here's the homework for you. So I already talked about it. So there are, I mean, there must be Power Transition Realism by Ogansky, and then if you want to add it, that's fine. So you add classical neorealism, defensive, offensive neoclassical. You can add one more power transition, but power transition doesn't really fit into this box, so that's why I get rid of it. I mean, it doesn't really. I mean, it's one of the theories from the realist perspective. So, what's the assumption? Why and what's the main goal? And the whether domestic politics matters or not. What is important analysis point? And what's critics? I mean, critics, I didn't really give critics, so it's your thing to answer this critics. So that's my homework for this Friday. Let's figure it out. What's the main difference among these five?